go back to when you were working with the police, did you find, like, what were some of the racial disparities and issues that you saw from the inside? Because we almost never get an inside view from the actual police of how they saw racial issues, firsthand. And can you give us some insight into any of those, and maybe some examples of any disparities that you saw or didn't see, or that people are calling out now?
I think one of the hardest parts is that how it shows up in police departments varies depending on where you are. Like, Southern racism is kind of different than Northern racism. And so in police departments, I feel like it's like, because we carry weapons and deal with conflict, like, it's way more visible than like when it happens at a school, or when it happens in housing, when you're trying to, get an apartment or buy a house, or when it happens in healthcare, when you're not getting the care that you need. It shows up everywhere. It just shows up really awful and violently on the street, in public, when it's policing. So there's that. I'll just say that in general, and it bothers me when I hear people like, cops are racist, because we're no more racist than a firefighter or a doctor or a lawyer. However, I will also say this, that if you want a brief history lesson, I don't know, briefly. So there's a reason, like, everything is the way it is. And it starts back in 1619, when the first enslaved people were brought here, that there's been people making decisions about who gets what, and they were not the enslaved people. They were not black people that could make those decisions, that allowed for certain things. And some of the stuff more recently, is like in the early part of the 19th century, was in the, like, especially like in the 40s and 50s, was a thing called redlining. Some of you all probably know about it, right? Who gets to live where. It was written into like the federal laws about who gets a mortgage in these neighborhoods and who doesn't. And so that's why we see like inner city neighborhoods that are predominantly black, and then we see white people in the suburbs, because the government allowed for that. And so I also believe that because of the disparity, so the civil rights movement did a lot of good. It stopped a lot of problems. It stopped certain practices, but it didn't fix the damage those practices did. And so even though they said there's no more redlining, well, you still had a really poor neighborhood in the inner city, like, because now you can join unions. Like, unions can't exclude you because of the color of your skin. It didn't change the social and economic demographics of that area. And so there was more crime, and crime is not a race thing. Crime is like usually a poverty thing. There's more crime and poverty because people have a scarcity mindset. And so they make worse decisions, and they, harm each other more often. It's just the way it is. So, and I'm not a sociologist, but, and so I think what happened is that, I don't know, I wouldn't even call it well-meaning. I'll just say that police executives, who, in my opinion, need a lot more training than they get, were making decisions, policy decisions about how to deal with this this crime. And instead of saying, well, the root of the problem is because of this 400-year history we have of oppression and neglect and abuse, instead of looking at it as perhaps a health crisis in many instances, they were like, well, we're just going to stop questioning and frisking people. And so you had these heavy-handed police tactics that were disproportionately used in these communities, because that's where the more crime was. And so it unfairly targeted people of color, right? That's racism. And it was part of a system. So now it's systemic racism. And I would say that the cops doing it may have started their careers well-meaning and wanting to help people, but quickly learned in those systems, if you want to get promoted, you're going to be the guy that makes the most arrests. You're going to be the guy that gets the most drugs, the most guns. You're going to be the guy that does. So you're the one who's more heavy-handed. You're the one who perhaps start breaking the rules. And you're the one who, and so this system becomes a racist system because it disproportionately affects these groups of people, and it's rewarded by the system because those folks get promoted. And quite frankly, those folks end up rising through the ranks and being the ones in charge. And I don't think they ever question along the way, like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we harming these people? And statistically, there's maybe 5 or 10% of the people that commit crimes in those neighborhoods. And yet, we're blanket patting and frisking most of these folks, not grandma, not the little kids on their way to school, not all the girls, but and so now you've got this demographic of black men, probably 14 to 40 something, who are just being hammered by these people looking for a crime that 90% of the time isn't there, and so now you've just pissed a lot of people off for decades. And then you go and shoot the wrong person and you wonder why there's protests. That's why.